you're following along in the outline, here's the ground we're going to cover. The first thing we're going to find out is 2 Samuel, the break from 1 Samuel to 2 Samuel. I thought that Danny was going to be done by now, so I'm kind of jumping the gun. So, spoiler alert, Saul is about to die in 1 Samuel. We're going to learn that on Sunday. 2 Samuel is really the beginning of how does power transition. How many of you know that the transitions of power is often where the greatest conflict and issues in power come? It doesn't take a genius to look around our world and recognize that, but if you look in history, for instance, things happen when power switches hands. In the Roman Empire, if power was passed down to a blood relative, that was usually as peaceful as it got, but usually that didn't happen. Usually it was a military conquest, a revolution of some kind, and when that happened, the person ascending to the throne was expected to do something, and that was pretty much to eradicate and kill every single person affiliated with the previous dynasty. And so this is the bloodshed that happens in the turning over of power. And I only mention it to say that if these people hadn't chosen to have a king, there wouldn't have been a turnover of power at all. And we're still living with some of the consequences of that. So we're going to be talking about, number one, how will David treat the historical legacy of Saul before him? So Saul is going to die. David's going to ascend to the throne. And I just wrote this down, that when you're in charge of the pen of history, you get to decide how history is recorded. How do you describe your enemy or your foe? And we can draw some lines. We're talking about kings, but maybe you were hired on to a company and your predecessor had a reputation. Maybe he left for another job, or maybe she got fired. How do you speak about that person? Because that matters a great deal. The second thing we're going to talk about is how is David going to navigate this big cultural expectation that you're supposed to eliminate all your competition. That's how you solidify your power. So when that is in his power to do it, it's the expectation that he does it, and he can do it with a full green light and no issue at all. Will he choose to do it, or will he not? And then the last thing is, how has choosing a human to rule over the people worked out after one single king? So this is important to notice. How many kings have we had so far? One. How is it going so far in 1 Samuel? Not well. And if we think it's not going well, it's actually going swimmingly compared to how it's about to go. So let's jump in. This is 2 Samuel chapter 1. There's a lot of scripture there, but we're going to move fast because we're going to land in some discussion questions. So I'm going to read at length, and I hope you'll follow along. After the death of Saul, well, how did that happen? We're going to find out in a second. When David had returned from striking down the Amalekites, I want you to underline or highlight Amalekites, because the Amalekites are the enemy. We've kind of moved past the Philistines. They're going to kind of surge back up from the fires in a little while. Now David is striking down the Amalekites. David remained 2 days in Ziklag. We talked about that a couple weeks ago on a Sunday. And on the third day, behold, a man came from Saul's camp, and his clothes were torn, and there was dirt on his head. So what's the deal with tearing your clothes and having dirt or ashes on your head? What has this man been doing? He's been mourning, exactly. And when he came to David, he fell on the ground and he paid him homage. David said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." And David said to him, "How did it go? Tell me." I love that phrase. It just seems like such a modern phrase. You came from battle. Your clothes are torn. You got ashes on your head. How'd it go over there? Tell me about that. And he answered, "The people fled from the battle. And also many of the people have fallen and are dead. And Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." Then David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" Now, I want to pause here for a second. What do we assume David's motivation is for asking this? What's the assumed motivation? Like, how do you know they're dead? What's at stake for David? Yeah, kingship. So the assumption, if you're reading along, is we're trying to get an idea of who David is. He hasn't ascended to the throne yet, so we don't know what his kingly composition is going to be. The assumption is, wait a second, if Saul and Jonathan are dead, that's the king and the natural predecessor to the throne are now dead. we assume, because we've been reading 1 Samuel, remember, that the prophet Samuel went to the house of Jesse and went son by son and told them that David is going to be king. And so if we're reading along, we immediately think David's motivation is, does that mean I'm king? But listen to this. So how do you know that they're dead? And the young man who told him said, by chance, you can underline and circle, by chance. Oh, just by chance, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa. And there was Saul leaning on his spear. And behold, the chariots and the horsemen were close upon him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called to me. And I answered, here I am. Anybody suspicious of this story? You should be. We'll talk about it in a second, but in 1 Samuel chapter 31, which we'll talk about on Sunday, it turns out that the servant of Saul actually says he saw that they were both dead and does not mention that this young man ever existed. So, if we're talking about the transition of power, what else happens in the transition of power? What's that? Loyalties change. You ever heard this phrase that there's hangers on? Yeah. Oh, here's my chance. The door is open right now. If I want to get in with the king, here's my chance. So this is what happened, David. He was leaning on his spear. The horsemen were close upon him. And when he looked behind me, he saw me, and he called to me, and I answered, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? Now, by the way, he's leaning on his spear, he's dying a slow death, and then he's just having a conversation with a guy. Who are you? Come, friend. Not buying it. I answered him, I am an Amalekite. That's a weird thing to say. Wait a second. David's enemies are the Amalekites. So we can mark this down too. Story's not adding up. And he said to me, stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, and yet my life still lingers. Sounds very poetic for a guy leaning on his spear or his sword dying. So I stood beside him and I killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. Okay, so we got this story. I've already told you, you could look in your Bibles if you wanted, but chapter 31, it's Saul's armor bearer already confirmed that Saul was completely dead before any of this stuff happened. So this stuff, according to 1 and 2 Samuel, did not happen. This young man shows up, and he claims that it happened. And what does he have in his possession? He has the crown. He has the armlet. These are the physical representation of who gets to be the king. And what does he say? He bows before David, and he says, here you go. Is this just a kind act to let David know, like, you're the king, praise be the king? No. What is the assumption that this guy's motive is? Yeah, ingratiate himself with David. Maybe I can be on the inner circle. It's a little bit weird that an Amalekite would do it. Is there any political kind of precedent for one of your enemies to show up and try to ingratiate themselves with the new king? It just reeks of like an operation that doesn't make sense. So he shows up. Now here's a couple things I want us to see. The first one is this, is that in this culture, this man comes with a message, and had we not known about 1 Samuel, all the stuff that he says would actually be great news to the world around them. So Saul is dead. If you're trying to be king, is this a good thing? Yeah, because there can't be two kings. Okay, so Saul is dead. He comes with that message. He's assuming when David hears this is going to be a good thing. He tells him, Jonathan is dead. Now, a couple nuances here. Number one, if you're trying to be king, is it good that the natural heir to the throne is also dead? Yes. Also, do you think this Amalekite has any idea the history of Jonathan and David? No. So he comes with this message he thinks is good news. How do you think David is going to take this especially? Very hard. This young man shows up. He's got the crown. He's got the armlet. He's got torn clothes because he's been in such deep mourning, right? And here I am. You're the king now. Now here's the thing, in the ancient world, the idea of blotting out the entire house of Saul would have been considered totally normal and acceptable for David. This is the check your rear view and make sure nobody is left alive. Why? Because you don't have the blood in your veins to claim the throne. Saul and Jonathan do, and how the ancient world works is unless you have the blood to rise to the throne, you got to come take it. That's the only way to get it. And so this guy comes and he gives him a message that it sounds like he thinks David wants to hear. And it's an Amalekite, a political maneuver. I wrote exactly what Sarah said. He's trying to ingratiate himself to David. And he says, the last step to you being king are these items I brought you. Let's flip, I'm going to flip my page, verse 11. This is how it continues. Then David took hold of his clothes and he tore them. Comma. So we're talking about leadership. I want you to underline or highlight this. And so did all the men who were with him. So what is David doing? He is choosing grief. He's choosing to grieve, not to celebrate. I think I put it in your outline as grief, not relief. Because every now and then I like to rhyme and pretend I'm a mega church pastor and got cool words, but I usually don't. So David took hold of his clothes. He tore them. This is grieving, mourning. And so did all the men who were with him. Now, who are all the men with David, by the way? Come on, you guys go to church on Sundays. Who's following David? The rogues. How did they become rogues? Who more or less said, you have no business being part of us anymore? Saul. These people, these mighty men, and they keep swelling in numbers, but these mighty men are basically following David because they weren't allowed to follow Saul. So they are in competition. There's friction between them and Saul. When they hear this message, what is the assumption that they hear? Yes, he's finally dead. Our guy finally gets to be king. My feeling as I read the tone of it is this, is that they are ready to celebrate. Except their leader doesn't choose celebration, he chooses mourning. And so did all the men who were with him. Verse 12. And they mourned, and they wept, and they fasted until evening for Saul, and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. I want to point this out. So who are they mourning for? They're mourning for Saul, Jonathan. What else does it say? Israel. Because they have fallen by the sword. I think this is really important here. I think this is good leadership is looking past Saul and even your friend Jonathan. If you're going to ascend the throne, what is your responsibility? It's Israel. Is there turmoil when a king dies in Israel? Absolutely there is. Does it say anything about, but secretly he was happy because his political ideology was Democrat and Saul was a Republican? It doesn't say that. It just simply says that David recognizes Saul was the king. And you may recall that David had chances to kill Saul. Not just one, he had multiple. And he chose not to. And what was his rationale for not killing him? Yeah, because Saul is the anointed one. You don't mess with God's anointed one. Who gets to remove the anointing? God. David says, that's not a responsibility I'm going to take upon myself. He mourns Jonathan. Why does he mourn Jonathan? He's his best friend. By the way, we're going to find out in a second. Do you remember back in the middle of 1 Samuel, Jonathan and David? I think it was their last interaction. It might not have been. They made a covenant with one another that David would remember him in the generations after. That is going to come back here in a second. And then he mourns Israel. Why does he mourn Israel? They have no king. Well, he's kind of their king now. But he recognizes there's turmoil. There's turmoil. There's confusion. There's violence, there's war going on, and his responsibility is to these people, whether they wanted to follow Saul or not. My responsibility is to them, and now they're in disarray, and he mourns them because they had fallen by the sword. Verse 13, and David said to the young man who told him, "Where do you come from?" And he answered, I'm the son of a sojourner, an Amalekite. Oops. Remember he already let slip that he was an Amalekite? I think that might have been an oopsies. So what does he say now? I'm the son of what is a sojourner? A traveler, a foreigner, a nomad, a wanderer. So what is he saying? Technically, I'm part of your enemies, but I'm not really, because my father was a wanderer, right? He's trying to create a case for wait a second, I know I let it slip that I'm an Amalekite and you're at war with my people, but it's not what it seems. David said to him, verse 14, how is it that you were not afraid to put your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? So you're telling me that the king of Israel, the anointed one of God, was going to die. It was inevitable. He was leaning on his spear. He couldn't move. And you decided that you should speed up the process. You, random sojourner, Amalekite enemy, and you think that's what I wanted to hear. Then David called one of the young men and said, go execute him. And he struck him down so that he died. Well, that happened quickly. That escalated fast. And David said to him, your blood be on your head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed. So we expect celebration. How many of you have been following along 1 Samuel and are like, man, this is dragging on. Can David just be king already? Yeah, I have. And finally he's king. It's finally his moment. I want to remind you what Saul has done to David. Saul has ruined his home and his family. Saul has made him a wanted man, just running for his life. Saul has ruined his greatest career opportunity. He was like the greatest general in all of Israel. He's wasted a decade plus of the best years of his young life just trying to get away, right? If this were a Hollywood movie, whether we like it or not, there would be a piece of us that would cheer a little bit when Saul finally dies. The problem is even as we're expecting it and we're cheering it, guess who's not cheering it? David. I think this is one of the reasons why the Bible describes him as a man after God's own heart. This is not fake. This is not fake humility. It's my greatest enemy and my greatest foe has died, but I see the larger picture because when David was found out in Bethlehem, the reason he was chosen, one of the reasons was God said, you will shepherd my people, which is convenient because David at that time didn't know how to rule people, but he knew how to shepherd, didn't he? And when a shepherd sees that the flock is hurting, what does his heart do? It breaks. The reason for it is irrelevant in this moment, and David chooses grief and mourning instead. He mourns his best friend, Jonathan, and he also mourns the state of Israel. There are people without a king, people in war and battle, people who have been led away from God. So he executes the young man. Now this is an interesting dynamic because, as we've said, David has had the opportunity, well, I guess back up. We got to remember this about David because sometimes we read the Old Testament and we like to gloss over some things because it makes us uncomfortable. The sword of David is not shy about bloodshed. David has killed with the sword. We could talk about war and violence in the Old Testament another time. But I want you to know that David is not shy about killing, is he? He isn't. It's just the truth. But he's refused to kill Saul. But then in the snap of a fingers, he executes a kid that he just met. I don't know if it's a kid or a young adult or a young man or what. He executes him. And I think here's kind of the beginning of David's rule. I wrote it down as a refusal to honor political jockeying. I think David sends a statement right at the beginning. There will be zero jockeying. There will not be people who brown-nose their way to the top, who come with a fake story before me and think they're going to get something out of me. He refuses to honor lying. The Bible clearly tells us that Saul was dead on his sword. His armor bearer testified about it. This young man comes with an alternate story. And by the way, it's back-to-back chapters. So if we were reading it along, we would see it very obviously. And then I wrote this: there's no rewarding a weasel. And I think this is what's going to happen. And the first 11 or 12 chapters of 2 Samuel kind of root this out. That David has zero tolerance for anybody who tries to get a little open door and jockey buddy up to him. He's not going to do that. In the first 11, 12 chapters, at the very end of your outline, I actually put a list, are chock full of all of these statements that every time David makes a decision, he consults the Lord. The Lord blesses him because God was with him. It's not until we get to Bathsheba where those phrases stop existing in 2 Samuel. As long as David is near the Lord, he does not allow this political, we're on your team, can we get something from you stuff. So he executes the man. He sets the tone of expectations. If you're a person of character who loves the Lord, you will be part of what David has going on. If you're trying to use my platform, my throne, David says, to get your own agenda across or create connections, it's not going to happen. So David refuses, this is my final takeaway. David refuses to take a shortcut of differentiating himself from Saul through his words. It will take his actions over time to show that he's different. Let's pause right there, because David's about to do something that makes me uncomfortable. He's about to sing a song. How are we doing? How's this all hit us? Glad he's finally there. Yeah. It's interesting that in full authority to dictate how the transition happens, he chooses basically to throw a mourning funeral. This is not a celebration. This is devastating. I think David deep down knows that this is the product of people wanting to be led by another person. And so I got to make the best of a situation that God never intended. Like I said at the beginning, the transition of power does not happen if these people say, oh, now that we've listened to you, Samuel, we're going to go ahead and just follow God. Remember, God says, I'll fight your battles for you. I'll direct you. I'll provide for you. And they're like, meh, doesn't sound that good. Give us Saul, right? And David lamented. This is verse 17. He lamented with his lamentation over Saul and Jonathan, his son. So he's not just done mourning. He sets aside time to write a lament, a song. And he said it should be taught to the people of Judah. Behold, it is written in the book of Jashar. We're going to talk about his song here in a second. I'll read it, but I want to point out a couple things. I would love it if somebody is interested in a little project. We don't know much about it, but this thing, the book of Jashar, or Jashar, is a really interesting kind of little topic. It's referenced in the Old Testament. It's also referenced in rabbinical literature. To the best of my knowledge in 30, 45 minutes of reading, it means the book of the upright or the book of the just man. A lot of people speculate it's almost like Proverbs, but instead of phrases that are proverbial in nature, it's the qualities and characteristics of a person who's right in the eyes of the Lord. So David writes this song and commands that the song be put in this book. So in some ways, we're kind of lucky that it ended up in 2 Samuel too, because it sounds like it ended up in this book, which we don't have anymore, and in 2 Samuel. And so he says, here's the song that belongs in the book. Before we jump into the song, I want to point something out about songs. How many of you like songs? What's your favorite song, Paul? Right on the spot. Painted Black, great song. I used to slay at that song on Guitar Hero. I just want to let it be known right here, right now. When I was a sophomore in college, Painted Black on Guitar Hero, I was your guy. That and Mississippi Queen, if you wanted to know.
Don't be ashamed.
What are other popular songs? Let's talk about songs that like shape a moment in history. Not just like a pop song that's on the radio a bit, but what about songs that like change history? Yeah. Unfortunate Son. Okay, that's a Creedence Clearwater song. What else? What is it? I don't know it, but I do know that in the history of music there's stuff that I don't know that clearly like changed an entire genre. Mm. Yeah. Mm.
Not one or two, and they're all brilliant. They're all masterpieces.
Mm.
Someone asked him once, "How could you write all these great songs?" He said, "Because they're all God-inspired."
Wow.
But he follows that all of the counterpoint, etc., was what Jimi Hendrix played, Jeff Beck,
Yeah.
all of these guys.
Yeah.
Eddie Van Halen. I mean, you can pick anybody, and that's who they copied.
Songs have a cultural ability to change an entire movement. You can think of like anti-Vietnam songs. You can think about the rise out of the Mississippi Delta of blues music that just, like, if you go read about it, people are not sure, like, where did this even come from? Who started this? They don't know. It just started to happen, right? Rock and roll comes at a moment. Like, these things come, these are just modern movements, but they come. Songs have the ability to shape the imagination of an entire moment. Now, here's the question. David, the mighty man of God, the man after God's own heart, does he know that? Does he know that a song has the ability to change? Well, wait a second. There was a pop hit about him. And how did that go over? He probably wished that pop hit didn't hit the radio and go platinum, right? Because it created him a lot of problems. But if there's anyone in the ancient world who knows that the right song at the right time can help the entire imagination remember a moment, it's David. So he writes this song. Songs shape how people understand what has happened. This is how I think of it. Songs are kind of like the people who watched the movie but didn't read the book. You know what I'm talking about? It's like the Spark Note version. Like, hey, did you like Lord of the Rings? Like, oh yeah, I loved it. And they start telling you, and you're like, oh, you've only seen the movies, right? Why is that? Because it's accessible. It's catchy. It gets stuck in your head, right? When you don't remember all the details, you remember songs. You remember video clips. You remember these things. It's how we're wired. And so David writes a song about this moment. He writes a song about the guy who ruined his entire life. That's what I want us to know. And this is what he said. Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. You, mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. He's talking about the guy who killed him, or claimed to kill him, right? From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. What is he saying? These guys were gnarly. When it comes to warriors, there was none that were like Saul and Jonathan. By the way, is that true? There's at least one that was better than both of them. And it's the guy writing the song. But listen, it's not so much about is it factually perfectly true. It's how do you shape the imagination to remember these people. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. Meh. Maybe by some. In life and death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You, daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. This is what I think is, as we talk about leadership. In the transition of leadership, David, I think, is the epitome right now of taking the high road. How many of you have had this happen to you? Maybe it's somebody who, maybe they're not talking smack or trash about someone else, but they're like, oh man, how was the boss before you? And you're like, no comment. Is that positive or negative? Negative. Did you actually say anything negative? Not really, right? And we might think like, well, that's taking the high road. I think the real high road is what David has done. He said, for all of eternity, I want to put a song in place to remember the very best version of Saul. Did Saul stay that way? No. But you may recall at the very beginning when Saul was anointed the king, did he start off pretty good? David is choosing to say, let's remember that Saul. For the sake of the people, it's not helpful, he says, to put it into your memory and have the thing you think about, Saul leaning on his spear, dying alone. He says it in the song. It's better to remember him as stronger than a lion, after God's own heart, the mighty one who has fallen. That is the legend of how we will remember Saul. By the way, he's starting off, this is like, your first 10 days in the new workplace is like your 2 weeks to really create a name for yourself. David is taking the time that's supposed to be for him to make a name for himself, and he's making sure that Saul's name is remembered positively. This is the looking for the best in everyone. And then the last thing I want us to write down before we move on to the questions is this. Next week, we're going to talk about something that happens not long after this. It's that it turns out that David is just as capable of Saul as trying to lie and sneak and murder his way to innocence. And so this is an episode in David's life where he's hitting it out of the park. But we cannot forget that the reason God has told them, you don't need a king, and they say, we want to be like everyone else, he has told them, at their very best, you might look at them and think, wow, David is worthy to be the king. But we're about to find out that David actually has a little bit of a skeleton in the closet. He has a deep desire for women. And next week, we're going to talk about Bathsheba. And I think if we keep in context that this is not that long after this, we realize that the guy who is the greatest king in all of Israel's history is also capable of absolutely every single thing that Saul did, and we're going to read about it. So here's the question. When we perceive others as competition or obstacles to our own success, we may be tempted to demean or criticize their character and poke holes in their history. This is the sentiment of pushing others down so I can rise up, or the kill or be killed. Under what circumstances are we most tempted to use this technique to boost ourselves up? Is it in the workplace? Is it in a friend group? What is it? This is the one-upmanship. This is the humble talk down on someone else. This is the let a little gossip flow and let them create the story that looks bad. How is this principle of humanizing and mourning even our adversaries good leadership? So how is it good leadership to say, you know what, I have a treasure trove of negative things I could say about Saul. He literally tried to kill me with a spear twice. He ruined my life. By the way, he took his daughter back, which was David's wife, right? Ruined so much of his life. And instead I decided, you know what, let's remember the good Saul. Let's remember that Saul who was a great king. What does it communicate to those you lead when you do it? Now, if you want to venture towards maybe your leadership is you own a business, maybe you're an employee, but you have people who work under you, maybe it's just in your family unit, whatever it is, how do you kind of connect this question to those situations? So let's take 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll reconvene and we'll finish with another story. Ready, set, go. So we got chapter 1 kind of wrapped up with a bow. How many of you would say, as a godly leader, David is doing pretty well? Now here's the other thing about leadership, human leadership, is even when the leader is doing well, how many of you know every other human being is subject to human nature? So let me catch you up to speed. We're going to make a pit stop in chapter 4 really quick, and then we're going to jump all the way to chapter 9. So let me tell you what happens next. All the while that David is trying to get off on a quick start, he ends up being anointed the king of Judah. But there's all sorts of civil strife and war breaking out. You may remember the servant Abner. Abner is Saul's servant. Long story short, he basically kills a bunch of innocent people, and then he gets murdered too. Chapter 3 tells us that all of a sudden David just starts getting some new wives. Just going along his kingly way, trying to get on a fast start. I literally wrote in the margins, new wives just start showing up all of a sudden. And then not only that, he just starts having kids. Here, I'll even read it to you. This is verse 2 of chapter 3. And sons were born to David. The firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. That's the wife. The second, Chileab of Abigail the widow of Carmel. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. And the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, just goes on and on. He just started, now he's got 6 wives. Just like a little editorial comment in there. He becomes the king. He's been on the run. And then he finally settles down and gets a crown on his head and a throne. And what's the first order of business? Well, I'm doing pretty good with the people out there. I might as well do something for me. And now he's got 6 wives. Then he's going to throw a fit in a little while that Saul's daughter, Michal, who was one of his first wives, had been taken from him. She actually was taken back to Saul's house. He wants her back. Except there's a problem. She got remarried to another guy, and he basically says, I don't care, bring her to me. And it literally says that the real husband follows her crying the whole time. Just takes her back too. He doesn't care. And so we're starting to get this glimpse that, does David have some really good qualities? Do humans have really good qualities? Behind the scenes, there's something brewing. Some seeds are being planted. And the reason I bring it up is next week we're going to see that those seeds have germinated and become a thing. Chapter 4. We're reading along. There's drama. There's violence. There's murder. There's all of these things. Then all of a sudden there's this little note that's just kind of tucked in there. And I think it's tucked in there for the reader. This is what it says in chapter 4, verse 4. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Okay, so all of a sudden out of nowhere, if you're reading the story, this doesn't seem to fit anywhere. All of a sudden we find out something very interesting. And what's the interesting thing if you're King David getting your reign off to a quick start? Wait a second. There's a male living in the line of Saul and Jonathan? That's interesting. And it's just kind of placed out there. If you read it in the story, it's just kind of like put in there as its own paragraph. And then it just keeps on going. And here's what we learn about him. We learn that when Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, this was not a good time. They were being pursued and there was a lot of violence. His nurse took him up to flee. So what is she trying to do? She's trying to protect his life. And as she fled in her haste, he fell. I think the insinuation is that she was carrying him and she fell and kind of like dropped him, okay? And he became lame. So he had a disability in his feet. And his name was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth means from the mouth of shame. Now this is important. Mephibosheth, I'm just going to write Meph. His name means more or less shame. Now why would that be his name? How many of you think that's his real name? There's other places in the Bible that give him a different name actually. So he's got this name, it means shame. Now here's the part that's very interesting. In the ancient world, his disability, and you can look it up, his disability, if you read kind of ancient rabbis, they say his disability is actually a physical representation of the reign of his grandfather. So his disability is somehow a reflection of how bad his grandfather is at being king. Does that make sense? In the ancient world, this particular disability was seen as, this is going to sound really bad, as a curse from God. So, I think here's the idea. His name means shame. He's technically by blood next in line, except he's largely considered to be cursed. Now here's the thing, is that he's still living. Does he have a claim to the throne? In some way he does. And in some way, what's about to happen is actually kind of like mind-blowing, and if you just kind of understand the ancient world at any place at all, this is what I want you to hear. What David is about to do is like, I don't want to use a certain word because I don't want it to be perceived wrong, but I think the word that makes the most sense, you can get mad at me, is progressive. He's about to do something that in the ancient world would have been like, not just raised an eyebrow, but like he's intentionally trying to do something so crazy that the entire ancient world would have just said, what is he doing? So listen to this. This is chapter 9 now. This is the next time we hear about Mephibosheth. So it's introduced that he exists. He's out there in the world somewhere. David doesn't know about him yet, by the way. This is chapter 9. And David said, it's almost like he's just thinking out loud, is there still anyone left in the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Is there anyone out there? Now there was a servant from the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. And they called him to David. Hey, Ziba might know. We have no clue. It seems like everyone that was from the house of Saul is dead. And the king said to him, are you Ziba? And he said, I am your servant. And the king said, is there not still someone of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God to him? This is not David saying, hey, can I do something politically expedient? Because being kind to someone in the house of Saul is not a good political move by David. It's motivated by God to show love and kindness. And Ziba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He's crippled in his feet. And the king said to him, where is he? And Ziba said to the king, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, at Lo-debar. Lo-debar means like bad land, like it's not good for cultivating. It means without a pasture. He's in hiding, and he's in some obscure place that nobody will find him. Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, at Lo-debar. So he went to go get him. Now let's pause right here. I'm going to put a little line right at verse 5. What is the expectation? Yeah, you should kill him. In the ancient world, he should kill him. You got this son out there. The prevailing wisdom is what happened to him. It was a curse from God. That's what's going on here, clearly, because that's the ancient understanding. He also has blood in his veins that belong to Jonathan and Saul. He technically could say, hey, I could probably get a contingent of people who believe the traditional way of kings. I should be king, not you. David summons him. He clearly knows that these are the customs because listen to this. And Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and he fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth. Now, anytime in the Bible when somebody in authority and power speaks somebody's name and it's just a one word, just the name, can you think of any examples of this? Elijah, Moses. Who usually does it? It's God. And what is kind of the dynamic here? That God knows that person's name, because knowing your name in Hebrew isn't just I know what you're called, it's what? I know you. I know about you. He says, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth answers and he says, behold, I'm your servant. So what is he saying? Don't hurt me. I'll do whatever you want. Don't hurt me. And David said to him, do not fear. You have nothing to be afraid of. I know the way of kings. I know the way of the world, and that's not what I'm here to do. So what does he say? He He says, "For I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always." And he paid homage and said, "What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?" So this is what he says. All the stuff that you were supposed to inherit because your grandpa was king and your dad was prince, it's yours. The land, the dwellings, the animals, we're going to find out the servants, it's all yours. It's all yours because it's rightfully yours, and that's how the law works. It's like an entire 180 of everything I think anyone hearing the story would have expected. Mephibosheth hears this, and he says this, "How could you show regard for a dead dog such as I?" I want to say this. I think this is maybe the most important thing. I think what's going on is Mephibosheth has believed a lie about himself, and it's not just a lie he created. It's a lie that the world has put on him and said is true. I think we all know exactly what these things mean, that people say certain things, and that's who you are. You are this, or you are that, or you're just this. I have a kindergartner, so every day I get a new phrase like, "Dad, what does it mean that you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn?" I was like, "What's the context?" "I was trying to play baseball and I kept swinging as hard as I could, Dad, but I just never hit the ball." I'm like, "Oh, you're not quite old enough to wear that one, but it's coming, right?" Or like, "Dad, why every time we do running at football practice, I'm either last or second last?" I'm like, "Oh, geez, here we go," right? Sorry, you got Dad's DNA more than Mom's. That's the problem. But we begin to wear these things. We begin to be told a story that kind of settles on us. And guess what? A story has settled on Mephibosheth. So much so that what does he say? "I'm like a dead dog compared to you. I'm nothing. Maybe he even believes I'm cursed by God. Look at me." And he believed that lie. And what does David do? He says, "You might know the way of the world, but I know the way of the Lord." Because right now we're talking about the good David who's connected to the Lord. I know the way of the Lord, and here's how it works. You didn't choose for any of this to happen. You didn't choose for any of this to happen. You didn't choose to be born of Jonathan, which was probably really cool for you when you were really little and now really terrible for you now. You didn't get to choose that your nanny accidentally dropped you. You didn't get to choose that somebody hid you away thinking the next king is going to kill you and you live out in the boonies with a stranger. You didn't choose all those things, but the way of the Lord is to say this: you are deserving honor. Why? Because I made a covenant with your dad once upon a time. And I told him no matter where life goes, I will take care of his life and all of the life of his bloodline forever. And I'm here to make good on the promise. And I tracked you down. I interviewed people to find out you exist. You're not a dead dog. You belong at the king's table. If you have a moment tonight, I would encourage you to look at Luke chapter 22. Jesus actually says to his followers that there will be a day when they get to do what? Eat at his table. What does it mean to eat at the king's table? Now here's why I chose these two stories. The young Amalekite who shows up and says, "David, there's great news. Saul and Jonathan are dead. Here's your crown. You get to be king. Can I have a position?" What does he get? The guy who says, "I have this disability. I should be murdered. We can't let David know I even exist. Hide me," gets what? A seat at the table. These are the reasons people always say that David is the foreshadow of Jesus to come. He gets a seat at the table. A seat at the table means lots of things. I want to just push forward and then we'll wrap up. Then the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, "All that belonged to Saul and all his house I have given your master's grandson." Ziba, you were Saul's servant, now you're Mephibosheth. Everything that belonged to Saul now belongs to him. "And you and your sons and your servants shall till the land for him and shall bring in the produce that your master's grandson may have bread to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, shall always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king commands, his servants, so your servant will do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. You want to know why? Because he is one of the king's sons. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem. He ate always at the king's table. And I love this. Now he was lame in both feet. Why do you think it was put in there? Yes, everyone, you read it correctly. And everything the world told you about this is wrong. That's what's going on. Yes, you heard that correctly. You don't have to flip the page back and reread it. I'll tell you again, everything you think you just heard is exactly right, and he eats at the king's table. He belongs at the king's table. This is like earth-shattering. I want to tell you two things, because just like human leadership and putting your trust in a king happens, these people are fickle. Ziba, in just a few chapters, is going to try to get in with King David, and guess what he's going to do? He's going to tell him that Mephibosheth is actually plotting to out him. It's a good angle to take if you're wanting to create some political drama, isn't it? David actually does see through it, and he makes the right move. But just so you know, all these people are like, and then he was his servant forever, la-ti-da-ti-da. Actually turns out to be like, well, I could leverage this new situation to get in with the king. So here's a couple thoughts. What is the equivalent of assuming God's favor or God's punishment on people? When are we guilty of looking and thinking, that person's definitely favored of God, or clearly by the circumstances that person is not? I think this story calls into question. And I think from a New Testament perspective and knowing who belongs at the table of Jesus, I think the calling is this, that we get to be the people who reverse bad theology about who God is and who God favors. I want to tell you one story, and then we'll wrap up. You can maybe think through the discussion questions. I'd encourage you to look this man up. There's a very prominent theologian. His name is Amos Yong. I think he's got to be in his 80s now. A pretty prominent, kind of charismatic Pentecostal theologian, actually. Kind of a developed theology about healing and praying for healing and the spiritual gifts, except he has an incredible story to tell, and this is the story. The story is that he grew up in this situation as a Pentecostal kid who was taught to pray for healing all the time. Healing, healing, healing. Anyone who's not healed doesn't have enough faith to be healed. That was what he was taught. Some of you actually probably know who this is and know the story. Behind the scenes, despite the leadership of his family in this church, his mom and dad were like this behind the scenes. You know what I'm talking about. In public, everything's good. Behind the scenes, at each other all the time. And everything was not what it seemed. And so he grew up with this feeling of like, man, we're always praying for healing, but my family can't even get it together behind the scenes. Finds out that his mom is pregnant and she's going to have a child. And the child is born with Down syndrome. So in this background, what do they start to do? They start to pray for, and what does that look like? They pray and they pray and they pray and they pray, and guess what doesn't happen? He's not healed from his Down syndrome. But he writes this incredible book. I think it might be called God and Down Syndrome, or The Theology of Down Syndrome, because he said what really happens is that my brother has special needs and he needs special services. And so the family had to make a choice. Are we going to set aside time and make sure he gets what he needs? And so they start to do that. And guess what happens? Mom and dad are forced to communicate. And they decide our communication isn't good for our family. We should seek counseling. So they go to counseling and they learn how to communicate. The church comes to realize that this young man has so much joy and energy that he's like bringing life to a place that's dead. And all the while they're praying for his healing, but it's not coming. And what do they realize? They realize that he actually healed them. I think that is the reverse of bad theology of what does it do when we are the people who look and say, God, you want to do a new thing. You can look it up. There's lots of like YouTube testimonies and stuff. I would encourage it. I do want to wrap up here. I did give you a list of things because I didn't want us to miss it. I just wrote signs of David's good leadership. It's that God is at the center of it all, and you can read. I just read the first, I guess, what chapter is Bathsheba? She's coming. Yeah, 11. This is the first 10 chapters of 2 Samuel. David's knocking it out of the park mostly, minus just accumulating wives quietly behind the scenes. But over and over and over, we hear like, then he spoke to God, and God spoke to him, and God was with him, and all that David put his hands to thrived. When we get to chapter 11, a lot of those phrases are going to disappear. And when those phrases disappear, we're going to find out that leadership takes a nosedive. Why? It's because God was supposed to be the leader from the beginning. The more God in the story, the better the people and the leadership will be. The less God in the story, the worse it will be. So that is all advertisement to tell you if you come next week, it's going to get very ugly. But I think it's important stuff to hear. I would love it if somebody would pray for us, and then we'll wrap up. Would somebody be willing to pray for us?